Hey fearsome friends, and I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. I apologise for not posting for so long, but I have some more great stories for you tonight. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. This happened to me a few years ago when I was 16 years old. I'm a petite person, and I've always looked younger than I actually am, even as an adult. People think I'm a teenager. When I was 16, my mum and I travelled to my home country for the holidays. We were so happy because we were only able to afford a plane ticket once every 2 years, and as time went by and we missed out on stuff going in our families' lives, this time my aunt, my mum's sister, and let's call her Sylvia, was pregnant with her first child. My mum and I didn't know Sylvia's new husband's family, so we were introduced to my aunt's husband, James, who was 38, his brother, let's call him Michael, who was 44, and his wife, who was 9 months pregnant. We quickly welcomed them into our family, because they were so nice and friendly, and we felt like we'd known them for years. One day, late after a party at my aunt's house, I was told someone would take me to sleep over at my grandma's house. My grandma lives all the way across town, and I'm the only one who is related to her. People were drunk and sleepy, and no one could give me a lift, so Michael offered to take me there on his motorcycle. My aunt said something like, "Thanks, you're a lifesaver," and I didn't think anything of it. I probably told myself that, okay, well I guess my new uncle is taking me there. I had to climb on the motorcycle since I am so small, and my aunt waved us goodbye at the door. We left and he asked me to put my arms around his waist so I wouldn't fall. I remember it was a cold night, and he said, "If you're cold, you can hug me tight," which I thought was a bit weird. And after about 15 minutes, I noticed that he was taking a detour that went in the opposite direction. I didn't say anything because I thought he had a reason for this, but then we arrived at a big park which was very dark, and there were only about 4 people that I could see in the distance. He pulled up under a tree so it was even darker, but we didn't get off the bike. He then turned around and started putting his hand on my cheek and my hair. At this point I was so confused and scared I felt paralyzed, and realized that this man wasn't actually family. He's just some strange grown-up man. He said, "You're so pretty. I didn't think you were so pretty in real life." I was so nervous. I think I started to smile out of anxiety and fear, which I do when I'm uncomfortable, and I said, "What?" He then leaned in, got close to my ear and said, "You want to go to a hotel nearby? We don't have to spend the night, and I'll take you home right after." Now I don't know why, but all I could think of was his 9-month pregnant wife, and I said, "No, I want to go to my grandma's house," still with a smile as I didn't want to make him angry. He insisted so many times and I said no every time. He was so creepy. I thought he was going to ignore my request, when he finally gave up and took me to my grandma's. I immediately jumped off the motorcycle and ran inside, and he took off before my grandma opened the door. I told my aunt about this, and I don't know if she even believed me or just dismissed my story, so I never told anyone else ever again. Up until I was 18, he would message me on Facebook from time to time, saying how pretty I was that night. It was so weird, because I could see him posting about his new daughter and his wife. I can't help think that he thought I was younger and he could convince me more easily. So I'm a 22-year-old woman from Spain, and I'm very used to using public transport. It's not unusual to have some weird or creepy interaction with people, mostly men, who will randomly start to tell you about their lives and how sad they generally are. I usually just nod and politely smile until I can go on my way, and I try to be nice and polite too, because I'm terrified of offending crazy people. This had worked every time in the past. However, the encounter I'm about to tell you about, in particular, left me pretty shaken. So I was on the train on my way back home, and it was around a 40-minute journey. I usually wear my headphones, but that day I decided I would spend the time reading some random novel on my phone. It wasn't even dark out, so I was feeling fairly calm, and the wagon was mostly empty, except for one guy and a couple behind me. But I didn't pay much attention to any of them, because I was really getting into reading. The first 5 or 10 minutes were uneventful. That is, until I saw the lone guy get up and change his seat to one that was facing me. It wasn't immediately in front of me, but around 2 seats ahead, and he was looking in my direction. Again, I didn't pay much attention and just kept on doing my thing. Then I heard the guy mutter something. At first I thought he was on the phone, but when I looked up he was looking straight at me and didn't take his eyes off me when I made eye contact. It was only then I realized that he was actually insulting and cursing me repeatedly. The insults ranged from bitch, whore, stupid, and to much more colourful Spanish insults that I don't think even have a translation. I became paralysed. Why was this guy being like this with me? I'd done nothing to him and had barely looked at him. I thought maybe I had pulled a face or something earlier by mistake, but I had my mask on, so I couldn't have. I began to panic at this point and didn't know what to do. It got worse when the couple that were there got off the train, so now it was only me and him. I thought about getting off the train too, but we were positioned in a way that made it impossible for me to move anywhere without walking right by him, and I didn't want to get that close. I decided to ignore him and make out I couldn't hear him, and see if he would get bored and stop. But no, he just carried on. And it was the creepiest thing ever, because he was barely stopping to breathe between his insults towards me. He just kept going and going, repeating the same things over and over again in a menacing and threatening tone, all with hate in his eyes, always looking right at me, even though I tried my best not to look back. Then it got worse. He began to mix physical threats amongst his insults. I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna bash your brains in, and things like that. That's when I really started to freak out, as insults were one thing, but I felt that this was now escalating to another level. I messaged my friends and my boyfriend to tell them what was happening, so my boyfriend tried to call the train's security phone, but there wasn't much they could do. I didn't dare calling them myself, because I didn't want the guy to know I was calling for help. I wanted to cry so badly, but I didn't break because I didn't want to encourage him by letting him see he had an effect on me. Then for some reason he moved and changed seats to one that was directly behind me. I got off the train at the next station, even though it wasn't my stop, as I didn't want him to know which one was mine. I kept looking behind me, fearing he would follow me and act on his threats, but I didn't see him again. One of my friends then thankfully picked me up in his car and took me home. For the whole ride I was shaking, crying, and kind of laughing hysterically too, because I couldn't understand what had happened or why. I was paranoid for a while, thinking he would somehow follow me, but I haven't seen him again since. The worst part is that I was scared of using public transport for a couple of days afterwards, and I was so frustrated that a weirdo like that could have had an effect on me. He had done that to someone he didn't even know, and I kept thinking of what would have happened if I had been wearing my headphones and hadn't realized what he was doing. I would have gotten off my stop as normal. Would he have followed me? The train station where I usually stopped was in a pretty shady area too, so I still get creeped out when I think about what could have happened if we had been there alone. I'm shaking just thinking about it. Now I have a story to share that has really traumatized me for quite a while now, and I feel this is a good place to share it. So I'm from New Zealand, and over there we have the odd missing person or scary murder case, but it's otherwise safe here and not much goes on. I mean that in a way that as a 19-year-old girl, I feel comfortable to walk the streets at night or go on hikes alone, and everyone looks out for one another generally. This happened in the summer of 2019, and my boyfriend and I were headed out on a picnic date to a spot we had visited many times before, called Karakariki Track. It's at the end of a very long, windy and rural farm road off of the state highway, so you drive for about 15 to 20 minutes from the main road down a long farm stretch, and at the end is a large cul-de-sac and a massive surrounding farm. The owners of the farm have left the land kind of open to the public as a reserve, because there are native trees and other things, and because about a 15-minute walk from the cul-de-sac car park there's a small waterfall you can go swimming in. The track is really popular, as it's one of the closest swimming spots to the nearest city, which is Hamilton, and it's really scenic and beautiful. You can cross footbridges and pass by creek beds, etc., and the farmers still go through every now and then to do their work, but there are fenced-off areas that the public can't enter too, as they still actively work the land. So this particular day, my boyfriend and I were really happy, because the parking lot was empty and it was a super hot summer's day, which was really rare. We saw the farmer crossing with his cows through the gate on a quad as we arrived, and he smiled and waved at us. He was an older man, and we had spoken before as we were regular visitors. So we set off towards the waterfall, and crossed one footbridge and passed through a big paddock of cows. Now the track is quite narrow, and the creek is right next to it down a bank, so you have to be careful. We saw the waterfall, decided against swimming as we had no towels, and headed back towards the car park. On our way back we decided to go down a little bit of a steep gravel off-ramp from the track that led to a more private tree-covered area right by the creek. We were kissing and whatnot, and I was laying on my tummy, reading a book, as my boyfriend was sitting up playing on his phone, rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We were there for about 10 minutes, before I turned and glanced up the gravel path. Way up even further on a hill through one of the farmer's gates, I saw a big man on a quad bike who I didn't recognize as one of the farmers, as there's only an old couple who work the land. But he was just sitting there, staring at my boyfriend and I. I don't even want to think about how long he had been there before we'd noticed, so I told my boyfriend what I could see, making him turn to look too. As soon as the guy saw we were both looking at him, he opened the gate and started heading down towards us. We immediately got up to leave, as we didn't want to have a conversation with a farmer about us getting freaky on his land, which is what we both assumed would happen. But it was so much worse. This guy came down the gravel track and ran his quad right through the creek. He then left it there running in the water and got off. He was talking to himself, saying things along the lines of, "I messed my quad," and "I've damaged my engine," over and over before he even got anywhere near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave at this point, when he began to head towards us. He didn't even make small talk, which was really strange, because he went straight into saying, "Have you guys seen any fish? I'm looking for some fish to kill." My boyfriend told the guy that there was no fish in the creek as it's fresh water, and that he was probably best off to catch some eel. This sent him into a fit, and he said, "I don't want no effing eel. I want to kill some fish." I had made it a point not to look the guy in the eyes, as I didn't want to draw the conversation towards myself, because I was already extremely freaked out, and didn't want him to notice. My boyfriend was much more of the calm and strong one when it came to stuff like this. But for a second I did look at the guy, and I thought it looked like his face was slightly deformed. I thought maybe Bell's palsy. As I work in aged care, I've seen it a bit and it looked similar. I bent down to tie my shoelace, and as I stood back up, that's when I noticed a pistol on this man's waist. Now listen to me closely. This is the first and last time in my entire life I have ever seen a real-life gun, as it's incredibly hard to get a firearm in New Zealand, especially after the regulations following the mass shooting in Christchurch. And not only that, he had one pistol on his belt, and was waving another one about in his hand as he talked to my boyfriend about wanting to kill some fish. He was aiming it down to the creek every now and again, then swinging it around on his finger. My boyfriend gave me this stern look, and stern is the best word for it, because the look spoke a million words to me in that moment, and he nodded his head towards the gravel hill leading back to the track. I grabbed the 2 bags we had, fake-checked my phone, and told the man that our family were waiting for us back at the car park. He completely ignored what I had said though, and instead said, "That's a cool hat you've got on," or something along those lines that were completely irrelevant. So I dismissed myself, said goodbye, and made my way to the hill. In my mind, I didn't want to look back and see that my boyfriend had been shot and then a gun at my own head. I knew that our best bet was me getting up this hill onto the narrow path where he couldn't ride his quad and sprint towards the farmer's house. As I was walking up the hill, this guy said to my boyfriend, "That's a really pretty girl you've got there." It was like all the intentions of his that I didn't want to believe were just then confirmed. I actually felt like I was going to die. My boyfriend, though, said a quick, "Thank you, we'll be off now," and headed up the hill with me. The guy kept talking, though, like the conversation hadn't ended, even as we headed away. He just stood there, gun in hand, and watched us leave. As soon as we were around the corner, we sprinted all the way back to the car park, where there were over 10 empty gun shells. We hadn't noticed this before. We had run into 2 girls in bikinis arriving at the spot, and informed them about the guy and everything that had just happened, so they got in their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to ask if he knew the guy, as we'd never seen him on the land before, but they weren't home anymore, and as for the gun, it's still really freaky to me, as I'd never seen one before. But the pistols the guy had looked quite old and rusty, and when we discussed the incident on the way home, my boyfriend suggested they were probably handed down to him from someone else. This incident has stuck with me for the past few years, and my boyfriend and I have not been able to return to that spot again, which really sucks, because that's where we had our first date, and it meant a lot to us. I had to drive past the road leading to the track for about a year too, as I commuted between towns, and it always made me feel sick. I could have lost my life or my partner that day, or so much worse, and I'm always extremely grateful that my boyfriend is the man that he is, and was able to steer the guy away from us for us to leave. To communicate to me through movement to tell me what to do in my freaked out state too. He told me afterwards that he was ready to die if he had to, because knowing the guy had been watching us beforehand and complimented me in the way that he did, it was clear that he could have had some scary intentions. It's also made me way more fearful now to travel in the bush alone, which I've done my whole life. This happened a couple of years ago when I was probably somewhere between the age of 7 and 9, and it was so creepy I had to share it. I was sitting on a swing in my front yard, chilling and looking at the neighbourhood around me, when I noticed a car turn onto the street and was going quite slowly. I figured they were probably just looking for an address. Then they came down the street towards my house, stopping in front of one of my neighbours across the street and 3 doors down. I remember thinking something along the lines of that the neighbour's daughter, who was in high school, was probably just being dropped off by friends or something, and I didn't think much more of it. That is until the car pulled away only 10 to 20 seconds after pulling up. Again I reasoned it away, thinking that maybe they'd dropped their phone down the side of the seat or something and had to pull over to grab it. My dad did this often, you see. But soon after that thought, another car came and did the exact same thing. At this point, being a really paranoid kid who was terrified after hearing stories of kidnapping and being warned by parents, I ran inside the house as fast as I could and watched from the window as at least another 15 cars did exactly the same thing. It was pretty strange that tons of cars would come and do that, And this was the middle of the summer too, so it's not like they were looking at holiday lights. I checked with the neighbour's son who's my age, and their house hasn't been put up for sale since they moved into it 12 years ago, so it's not like they were looking in interest to buy the house. If anyone has any ideas to what they could have been doing, please let me know, as I've been wondering for years. It was October 2020. I'm a 17-year-old girl, but was 16 at the time of this story. I was walking into my local skate park with a friend, let's call her Chloe, to sit down at the gazebo so we could hang out, when a man, let's call him Michael, approached us with concha and coke and asked if he could eat his bread there. A concha is a Mexican sweetbread, which is basically just bread with some cookie dough crumble on it. Chloe and I tried to ignore him when he sat down next to us, but it was extremely hard when he started to make conversation. Michael offered Chloe and I cigarettes, and I declined, but Chloe accepted, which I was fairly irritated with her for, as that basically gave him an opening to start chatting to us. Michael sat crisscrossed next to us and started rambling on and on about how he had crystal meth and how he wanted to smoke it, but he didn't have a pipe. He asked us if we did, and we obviously told him no. Then he proceeded to pull out a baggie filled with what I can only assume was meth, and offered it to us. I began to get a bad feeling in my stomach at that point, as we both declined his offer, and he put it away, lighting up a cigarette instead. He talked nonsense for the next 30 minutes that Chloe and I were sitting there for, going on about how he was Michael Jackson, and we were his Lisas. Lisa 1 and Lisa 2, he called us. He didn't once ask us for our names. He just made them up. He said he was a musician and that he was going to make it big once he got off the streets. Chloe and I looked at each other, and I gave her the look that I wanted to leave. She got the hint, so I told Michael it was time for me to go home and that I needed to be back by dinner time or I'd be in trouble. He looked at us with an angry expression and said, "Okay. Can I get a hug?" Chloe told him no, but before I could even respond, he grabbed me and pulled me into a tight bear hug, kissing the side of my face. Chloe just stood there and said nothing, and did nothing. Michael released me after I attempted to push him off, and I had tears in my eyes. Then I got up, and before I could even start walking, he grabbed my hand and asked if we wanted to hang out again. Chloe and I sped walked away, and thank God my best friend Evan lived about 5-minute walk from there. Chloe and I got out of Michael's view and bolted for Evan's house. I got up to his room and immediately fell into his arms, crying my eyes out. I didn't tell my mum until later that week, when I saw the man again when we were grabbing dinner downtown. I started to have a panic attack, and when we got into the car I told her everything that had happened. Michael kissing my face, me trying to get away with Chloe, and even going to Evan's house after the incident. We filed a police report afterwards, and even after a year, my case has yet to be closed. Michael is currently residing in a mental hospital, so they can evaluate his condition off of meth, and see if he actually is capable of going to court, or if he is too mentally unstable to get charged with anything. I hope someone sees this story and doesn't make the same mistake I did. Don't let people take advantage of you. So I was scrolling through the subreddit Creepy Encounters, and it reminded me of a story that happened to my twin sister and I about 2 years ago. We were 22, almost 23 when it happened, and as we'd moved to a different town to pursue our studies, we'd only come home for the holidays. It was a summer's evening, and our father wanted to cook us all something, but was missing a few things, so we all decided to go to a little grocery shop in the city centre. It was too late to go to a supermarket and a bit too far. My father didn't want to go too far for just a few things that were easy to find closer to home. if a bit more expensive, and when we got there, he stayed in the car and sent my sister and I in to get the things we needed. We were discussing which brand we wanted and the price, and an old guy, enough to have grandkids, interrupted us. He asked if we were twins, which is obviously a question we are used to hearing, so we smiled politely and answered that yes, we are twins. Cue the, "Oh, you look so alike" spiel. For the record, we don't think so, but we are used to each other, so we know all the differences between our physical appearance. Then the question followed, which one came out first, which always makes me feel uncomfortable. But when they're nice, I try not to show my discomfort. But then this guy started asking if we had boyfriends, if we wanted to have children, and if we planned to stay together, etc. And it was starting to get creepy. But as I'm quite the introvert, I didn't say it outright, but did make sure to show it in my body language, that I was immensely creeped out. I turned away from him and looked at the cash register. He then started to say that he wanted to marry my sister, that her eyes were a mirror, and that he could see she is so kind and docile. Even if it was creepy, I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief, because really, my sister, kind and docile. She is actually so sassy and savage, and I love her for it. He said their children would be so beautiful, and at this point it was past being creepy, and I was getting really pissed. Why the fact that we are twins make him and other people in general think they can say things like that, or ask personal questions. I was also getting really annoyed because my sister and I are super protective of each other. I said that she was not going to marry him, and that it was absolutely creepy that a guy old enough to have grandchildren would say to someone potentially young enough to be his granddaughter that he wanted to marry her and have children with her. We got what we wanted, bought it and left, with the guy behind us trying to apologize and say that he didn't mean it like that. As we were walking out, still ignoring the dude, my sister told me that I should have just ignored him because he wasn't worth it. I don't think we told our dad, because we didn't want him to worry, even though he would have definitely agreed the guy was way out of line. He would have also said that we handled it properly by telling him off, then ignoring him and leaving. So to preface this story, I live in a very small village where we all know each other, and this story took place at around 10 p.m. at a gas station in the centre of my village. I was on my way to a friend's house with my sister and her boyfriend, who were both 3/4 year older than me, so they were driving me there. We stopped at a gas station and I walked in to get a drink whilst they stayed in the car. But as I was walking in, this middle-aged man yelled from across the parking lot, "Hey, how are you?" Again, it's a small village, so I thought he was just being friendly, so I answered, "I'm good, how are you?" "Fat and greasy and loving life," he said. I immediately got a strange vibe from him, but laughed it off, and right before I reached the door, he said, No, I'll get that door for you." I was in front of him though, so I got the door for myself, naturally. Then he said, "What's a little girl like you doing opening doors for herself? There's a lot of germs." Then he smiled and winked at me. I laughed it off again because I figured he was just being friendly, and I was overreacting due to my horrible social skills. I went and got my drink, then waited in line for the cash register. The computers were having issues at the time, so I was in there for quite a while. But it was finally my turn, so I walked up and set my drink on the counter. The cashier asked how I was, and I said I was good. Then the man walked up beside me and leaned on the counter and said, "This little girl called me fat and greasy in the parking lot." I was really weirded out by now, and nervously laughed, saying, "No, I didn't." Then I grabbed my drink, paid, and started to walk out. I headed towards the door, but then so did he, so I stopped and pretended like I needed something else. However, he stopped as well. I started towards the door again, and there he went, following me. I had the gut feeling that he had bad intentions, so I called my sister's boyfriend to come in and walk me out to the car. And while many may say that he was just being friendly, I was completely unable to shake the fight or flight feeling I had, especially as a young teenager in a gas station at night wearing a crop top. If anyone has any explanations as to why he followed me like that, please let me know, as it still scares me to this day. So this story involves one of my bestest friends who I've known since 5th grade. We were young at the time, but I don't feel comfortable stating exactly what age we were, because I don't want it to seem that I was just young and exaggerating the story. I've actually been asked if I'm lying, but I'm really not. This 100% happened, and years later I stand by everything that I said I saw. So let's jump in. It was a weekend, and as usual I was with this friend. Let's call her Elizabeth. Elizabeth didn't like sleeping alone and has 8 siblings, so she isn't exactly used to it either. Her bedroom contained 2 sets of metal bunk beds, one for friends who come over and the other for her and her closest sister. Elizabeth and I are very close, so we slept together on the bottom bunk. Her sister usually slept at the top, but she also had friends over, so they were in the downstairs living room where there was more space. Let's call her sister Raimi. And here's a fact about Raimi that you'll want to keep in mind. She has been having seizures, but they're only really caused by flashing lights, etc., and she's also slightly autistic, so doesn't register things like sarcasm. It was getting late and Elizabeth and I had gone to sleep. I had one of those dreams you swear is real, where you're fearing for your life, and earlier that day we had taken Easter photos. I guess that's what triggered this nightmare. So I was laying down beside Elizabeth, who was asleep, and I was on my phone, when the bedroom door creaked open. I looked over, but quickly realized that I was experiencing sleep paralysis, which I get often, so this dream was extra real. There was a girl with jet black hair and bunny ears, and she was crawling backwards with her head turned, staring into me. I tried to scream, but I just couldn't, and Elizabeth hadn't woken up either. The girl was getting closer and closer, and as she came within finger's length to grabbing me, I woke up, paralyzed. Elizabeth still wasn't awake, and here's the freaky part. The top of the bed was violently shaking, as if her sister was having a seizure. Eventually I was able to move again, and I started calling Raimi's name to see if she was okay, when the shaking immediately stopped, and I just laid there completely freaked out. Then at some point I guess I fell asleep. In the morning when we were downstairs having breakfast, I asked Raimi if she was okay, because I was pretty sure she'd had a seizure the night before. Her friends all looked at me weirdly, including Elizabeth, and that's when they said that Raimi was downstairs with them all night, as they'd woken up with her. My heart sank. What the hell? I asked Raimi if she was playing a joke on me, but she said she wasn't, and I believed her too, because quite honestly, she isn't the type to lie, and wasn't able to hide it if she did. I shared the dream I had with them all, and they all agree it was pretty freaky. I still don't know why the bed was shaking to this day, and disclaimer, it couldn't have been any of her other siblings, because A, 5 of them are only just now walking, and B, her other siblings were Raimi and a brother who was in college, and a sister who at the time hadn't been adopted and was still at her birth grandparents'. It was late summer and my teenage friends N, who's female, O, who's male, and I, a female, went out on a Saturday night to a dance club on Hollywood Boulevard. We had a perfect night dancing our 18-year-old butts off, and at about 1:30, 2 a.m. we headed out to the club to O's car, since he'd driven us all there. O's car was parked 1 block south of Hollywood Boulevard, right across the street from Hollywood High School, and as we were walking to his car, we heard footsteps behind us, a lot of footsteps. So we turned around and saw about 6 to 7 guys walking fast behind us. I figured that they were probably going to their car, but that was until I heard the footsteps getting faster and closer. N started running towards O's car, which was in sight now, and O and I didn't have to be told to run too. So we followed N, and all 3 of us were eventually running as fast as we could, because at this point we realized those guys were coming after us. N got to the car first, and luckily she had left the back door unlocked, so she got inside the back seat and opened the front passenger door for me. I hurriedly got inside and slammed the little button down, locking my door, and as I looked over to him, O was unlocking his door and got inside, but before he had a chance to close it, one of the guys following us grabbed the door and flung it open. He and another guy then started punching O in the face, whilst the other guys were trying to open mine and N's doors, all the while screaming at us to open them up and screaming obscenities. We were so frightened, crying, screaming, crouching down and praying that they didn't get to us. Lucky for O and everyone else though, a group of people turned the corner and started walking down the street that we were on, upon which our attackers abruptly stopped and ran away. Also, thankfully, because they weren't able to drag O out of the driver's seat. They couldn't really get a good angle when punching him, so the punches weren't all that damaging. After they'd run away, I was finally able to really look at O, and with horror, and despite the darkness, I could see his face was covered in blood. I was shaking, crying, laughing, and crying and laughing again. It was the weirdest reaction I'd ever had, but I couldn't stop. I had no control over anything. Finally, I wrapped my arms around O's neck, asking him through tears if he was okay and if we should go to the hospital, but he stoically said, "I'm okay. It looks worse than it is." O was always, and is to this day, the most mellow, loving, peaceful, spiritual, kindest person I've ever known, and it hurts even now thinking what he had endured that night, and the thought of what would or could have happened if those guys had managed to get to us girls is absolutely horrifying. Why would anyone do that to 3 18-year-old kids is beyond my ability to comprehend. To this day, this was the worst, unprovoked, terrifying thing that has happened in my life, and it took me a long time, years in fact, to be able to go out after sundown. So I just remembered that this happened and only now realised that I could potentially have been in massive danger. It happened when I was 14 years old and I was a very quiet boy. I looked like your typical messy 2000s makeshift punk kid and had had a bad family life, so I spent most of my time wandering around the town with friends to avoid home. Then when nobody I knew was out, I'd just walk around by myself. I had a few small piercings at the time, but my most prominent one was a little ear stretcher, made out of bone, carved into a snake that hung from my earlobe. I'd been hanging out in a square where myself and Co. used to loiter, when this very petite, hippy-dippy smiley lady came over and started chatting to us. Now this square was known for alternative people gathering and mingling, so we didn't think anything of an unusual woman coming to talk to us, despite the age difference of at least 15 years. After a few minutes chatting, she turned to me and started showering me with compliments, asking me loads of questions about myself. Being the shy little hermit crab that I was, I just mumbled short replies and didn't resist when she reached out to touch my earring, even though I was cringing hard, because I hated being touched. She made such a huge deal of the earring, going on and on about it, and kept trying to touch my arms and shoulders like we were besties. I was obviously uncomfortable, but didn't tell her to go away, as I hadn't grown into my voice yet. She hung around until my friends had to get their bus home, so we said our goodbyes and walked to the bus station. Nothing unusual happened. I saw my friends off as usual, and started the slow walk across the city to my own stop. I had some time to kill, so I took my time walking around random streets, taking the longest route possible. The sun was just about going down as I walked down a narrow street, lined with large glass shop windows. I had mad teen paranoia about my looks, so I could never resist looking at myself in a window. And when I did, I spotted two people trailing along behind me. I glanced around and saw the same woman from earlier still smiling at me, but now wearing a big shawl over her head, accompanied by a really big bearded man in a black hoodie with the hood up, who was maybe 20 feet behind me. I kept walking faster, approaching the corner, and I heard her call out, "Hey girl, I like your earring. Wait, I just want to know where you got it from." I already didn't really like her for touching me. She was annoying, and I just didn't feel like engaging, so I ignored her, rounded the corner, and darted into another side street that would lead me to my bus stop. The bus was right there waiting for its time to take off, so I just hopped on and forgot about it. Until now. At the time I didn't think much of it. I didn't really realize how inappropriate it was for random adults to just try to befriend random underage teens, especially since it was a woman. So I felt no real threat from her. I'd assumed that the man was her boyfriend or something. I thought seeing her again was a coincidence. But thinking on it now, I realized she must have followed us to the bus station, seen me, the quiet one, walk away by myself, and called in backup and followed me. I wasn't aware of human traffickers' luring kidnapping methods like I am today, and actually got a shock when I put it together just now. What do you think? Coincidence with just a very strange lady, or something darker for a vulnerable teen? Other viewpoints are very welcome. This was 15 years ago, and all I can do now is speculate. One Friday morning a few weeks after I turned 15 in 2013, my boyfriend at the time, Chris, and 3 of our friends, Liam, Stacy and Lisa, all decided to catch a train 3 hours away from our house to go on a weekend adventure at the beach. We had no plan, but we were super excited since we lived in the heart of the ghetto and didn't get out much. Once we'd arrived and hit the shops, first things first, we went to get a smoothie with the little bit of money we'd all put together and accumulated in coins. We then went outside to the smoking area, sat down and lit up a cigarette. At this point, we're sitting around in our own little world, talking crap amongst ourselves, as teenagers do, and sipping on our smoothies and enjoying the night, when I noticed that a woman was coming up and sat about 1.5 meters away from us. It's the coast, so whatever. That's not all even slightly unusual. But I remember getting some majorly eerie vibes from her instantaneously. She was continuously staring at us, specifically me, from the moment she'd sat down. I know this because of the constant eye contact every time I tried to inconspicuously look over. This made me incredibly uncomfortable, to where I even pointed it out to my friends, to which they all agreed, but we all kind of shrugged it off like, whatever, there's weirdos everywhere. About 5 minutes or so later, my friends noticed that she was still not only staring, but at this point pulling out her phone and very obviously taking a bunch of photos in our direction. We quickly pulled out our own phones and began filming her, and she got ridiculously angry and started screaming at us, saying that we had no right to film her and to delete the footage. A security guard came out through the shop doors, saw the commotion, and asked us what was going on. We explained and showed him our videos, which he told us to delete, and we unfortunately did. Then we told him that we were 100% sure that this woman was taking photos of us, explaining that we were minors, and that it was actually highly illegal. My brother was halfway through a law degree at the time, so I was well aware of my rights, which thinking back makes me think I was a real dumbass for actually deleting the video of her when the security guard told me to. So he went up to the woman and firmly told her to show him her camera roll, and she obviously declined. He proceeded to explain that she had to, otherwise he was going to have to get the police involved, so she reluctantly agreed. I was standing next to the security guard as she opened her camera roll, and I saw that it was filled with photos of myself and none of my friends. So naturally, my chest dropped, and I internally freaked the hell out. And when I say her phone was filled, it was filled. As in she had an iPhone, and the entire gallery page was taken up by pictures of me. The security guard's face instantly dropped, and he looked very uncomfortable, like he had no idea what to do in this situation, and he told her to delete the photos and move along. We all anxiously watched her delete them. Then she angrily mumbled something under her breath that none of us could catch, and walked away whilst death staring me until she was out of view. We were floating around there for another 2 days and never saw her again, and this whole situation randomly pops into my head every once in a while, and I wonder what her actual intentions were. Was she taking photos of me to sell me? Was it sex trafficking related? Was I about to be kidnapped? Was it nothing and I'm just overthinking it? The scariest part thinking back on it all is, though, that we were pretty much a group of children of 14 to 15 years old, with no adults around, 3 hours away from our homes with nowhere to actually stay, and passing out as a group in random places like staircases or the sidewalk next to the beach with no blankets. We froze our asses off. Anyone could have done anything to us at any point, and considering our parents didn't give a crap, no one would have noticed until it was probably too late. I don't know. Am I overthinking this entire situation? Maybe it was nothing. But what if it was something? Either way, it makes me uncomfortable. What do you think? So I'm from Brazil, and 4 months ago, one night, a few friends and I were smoking and talking in a tourist spot in my city, when a very creepy man emerged from the forest nearby. He came over to us and started, let's say, the freak show. He wasn't on drugs, apparently, and he had a Rastafarian vibe, wearing long dreads. He started to talk about how his prognatheism, which is when your lower jaw bulges or protrudes, affected his social life, and how the anti-tabagism propaganda on the cigarette box he was holding was all wrong. He used only a mixture of the archaic and cult Portuguese to communicate, so because of that I couldn't understand everything he said. He then took a cigarette box out of his pocket and showed us. We all ignored it at first, because why would you pay attention to something like that? But he said that he'd made it himself, handing us the box to show us. It was a very detailed, nearly perfect, handmade box. I removed the outer plastic tentatively, like I was handling a precious jewel, and voila, 20 slim handmade cigarettes, all exactly the same size. So I know that this was probably stupid, but we were all a bit curious and high by this time, and we took one out of the box, lit it up and shared it between us. We offered the man the last of it, then we said goodbye, still assuming he was just a normal guy, and moved on to our next hangout spot to smoke the rest of our weed. Passing a regular spot that we know well, we noticed the guy again, walking slowly along the street. We said hello to him and he responded with a head nod, and that was it. After that night he started to appear near my home, just walking around the street. One time I saw him catching the bus at night to the station, and last month my friends and I began to see him more and more, at least 3 days a week, in the most random places possible. Last week he appeared near one of my friends' workplaces during the day, and it wasn't the first time. He offered one of his cigarettes to a man that works nearby to my friend's work, and on the same day he appeared to another one of my friends twice. It was on my block on the street corner opposite the bus stop, and he was walking slowly. What is this? A strange Rastafarian man always turning up where friends and I are. Does anyone have any idea what he could be up to? 'Cause I really don't know. I personally think he is someone not to be trusted and is asking for a good punch and kick to the face. Next time I see him, I will definitely question him. As a kid growing up in western Pennsylvania, there was an old abandoned railroad in the woods near my house. The railroad went through a valley with a pretty large winding creek, and there were several cuts and tunnels through the hills of the ravines and valley on the either side of the creek. I'm pretty sure this railroad closed down in the early 1900s, and by the 80s and 90s was overgrown with the tunnels in a pretty advanced degree of collapse and looked more like natural caves. Needless to say, this was a perfect area for playing and exploring the woods for a kid. Well, from a kid's perspective. I'm pretty sure most parents wouldn't want their 11-year-old children exploring abandoned railroad tunnels. One year we'd had an exceptionally warm December, and I had a few friends staying over at my house for Christmas break. Of course I wanted to take them down to the railroad tunnels, and I probably hadn't been down there since the summer. As we were approaching one of the tunnels, we got stopped dead in our tracks. In front of one we saw this grey skeletal figure holding a scythe, which made us take off running back in the direction we came. My neighbourhood was about a half mile to a mile away, mostly uphill, and we came bursting out of the woods into one of my neighbour's backyards, completely breathless. He was out doing yard work and was obviously curious as to what we were up to. We told him what we'd seen, and he assured us that we did not indeed see the Grim Reaper, and offered to go back into the woods with us, so we all trekked back down to the creek with my neighbour. We came to the tunnel, and sure enough, there it was. A skeletal figure, grey, wearing a black cloak with a distorted, twisted body, and was holding up his scythe, which looked like it was an extension of one of his arms. He was just standing there, motionless, silently guarding the mouth of the tunnel. My neighbour motioned for us to hide, and he and the Grim Reaper had a stare down, which seemed to last forever. The neighbour then began laughing to the point of tears, and he had to sit down. He told us to come over and see. Going over, we could see that it was a tree that had been hit by lightning. The trunk had basically exploded, and the bark from the tree was still attached in places that looked like a cloak, and the twisted, exposed portions of the trunk appeared to be his body, head, arm, and scythe. It probably happened a few months prior, and the exposed trunk wood had weathered grey already. Even now, knowing what caused it, it was still really freaky to look at, and still made us nervous, so we were happy to leave. This thing was so perfect it almost looked like someone had carved it with a chainsaw, but the wood was too rough and split for that to have been the case. It was completely natural phenomena. A few months later I returned with a camera and some other friends to show them the Grim Reaper in the woods, but it was completely gone. I couldn't even find remnants of the trunk or root system from the tree. It had just vanished. It may be of note that we would often find satanic graffiti in the railroad tunnels, pentagrams and such spray-painted on the stone cliffs and walls in and around the tunnel. It also appeared that lots of people had used the tunnels to have parties and get high, etc., as we would sometimes find syringes and burnt spoons and the like. I probably haven't been back down to check the area in about 20 years, but keep telling myself that one day, when I'm home to visit, I'm going to take a trek back into the woods to see how things are holding up. So I've worked in a couple of hotels in the past, mainly at the front desk dealing directly with guests, and I must say that I love working the graveyard shifts, as you never know what kind of interesting situations you might encounter, and it always seems fun, especially during the holidays. On this particular day we were full, and there were no more check-ins for me, so it was going to be a light night. I always had an accountant and a security guard in the lobby during my shift, but since it was a calm night, the accountant had gone to find a place to nap after he was done, and I honestly didn't know where the guard was. They thought that as there were no more check-ins, I should be fine. So I was going through the log from the last shift, and I found a sticky note with my name on it that read, "Beware 305, and nothing else." I was looking at the monitor with the cameras and clicked on the screen that showed the hallway where room 305 was, and I left it there whilst I finished my work. By around 3 a.m. I was still alone, and from the corner of my eye I could see movement on the monitor, and it was a guy. He seemed pretty regular, not creepy at all, and as he got closer to the front desk, he requested his room be cleaned. We didn't offer 24/7 housekeeping, so I informed him of that, and he said, "Then you come clean. I sleep all day and want my cleaning done during the night." I told him very politely that I couldn't do that, and before I could keep explaining this, he asked for my zodiac sign. I answered a bit confused. Then all of a sudden he changed the subject, now talking about how he was a warrior in one of his past lives, and that in this life he came from a long line of warriors. He kept changing subjects every 2 minutes, and I couldn't keep up, when suddenly he said, "So should we just start heading up to my room?" Again I explained that I couldn't, and he started getting this weird look on his face, like frustration. Then he just turned around and walked up to his room. 20 minutes later I saw him on the monitor coming down again, and this time he took the stairs, stopping before turning into the lobby. He was standing there watching me through a pillar, and I was standing in front of the monitor, so it may have looked like I was just working. He then started looking around, almost like checking if there was any other way to get closer without me knowing. I started to get a bit freaked out now, as it literally looked like he was stalking me. He went up 1 flight of stairs, then got in the elevator down to the lobby. I imagined he didn't realize that I had access to the cameras. He came closer to the front desk again and requested a tray with water, teas, and milk. So I called the kitchen to place the order and let him know it would be taken up. He asked again what time I was going to clean, and I just told him at 7 a.m. when housekeeping arrives. I started trying to locate the guard, as at this point I was getting concerned for my safety. This guy was starting to act a bit erratic, and before he turned to leave, he gave me an expecting look, opening his eyes wide, and said, "I have like 20 types of drugs in my system right now. That's why I'm awake and sleep all day. My mind is going 1,000 miles per hour right now." I didn't know how to answer honestly, so I asked if he needed medical assistance. He laughed and asked if I wanted to join him for tea, which I obviously declined, so he left for his room once again. After room service delivered his tea, the waiter went by the front desk. "Hey, so we need security to be here with you, as the guy from 305 just asked me if he could use our stairs to get to the front desk without being seen. But first he offered me money to convince you to go to his room." I was freaked out for sure, but since another person knew of the situation now, it gave me a sense of safety, I guess, and the waiter left me to try and look for the security guard. At 5 a.m. the guest came out of his room again, and this time he headed for the maintenance stairs. I didn't have access to the cameras there, but I knew he couldn't get close to me without me seeing him, so I didn't feel in any real danger. Then the waiter showed up and told me that one of the security guards caught the guest trying to get to the front desk. The guest kept repeating that it was my idea, and that I had been trying to get to his room all night, and that I told him to go through those stairs. The guard made a report about the incident and added what the guest had said about me, so it became a bit of a big deal with upper management, because it was made to look like the guest was right. It turned out, though, that while they were investigating the situation, some of the female staff claimed he'd tried to get them to his room under any pretext possible, but since the attempts were really obvious, and he seemed out of it, they would just go in a group or send a male co-worker. We've had creeps in the past, but this guy took the prize. The guard that was supposed to be with me had fallen asleep in the bathroom, and was suspended for it, and the accountant was reprimanded for leaving me alone too. They were horrible to work with then after, because they claimed it was my fault, and management tended to always be on the guest's side for any type of situation. So no one thought of reporting this guest, and they would have fired me for what he'd said, had it not been for the waiter speaking up. It was usual for the staff to not report suspicious activity, because that brings negative attention to the hotel. The best we could do was be cautious and warn each other about creepy guests. So every summer of my childhood, my whole family would travel to stay at my grandparents' home in a small town in Ohio. They didn't have a big house, so all 4 of us girls had to share a room, with me and my oldest cousin in one bed, and my 2 middle cousins in the other. It was incredibly cramped, so we tried to stay outside as much as possible, attempting to find something to do. This particular summer I was 9 and my cousins were 12, 13 and 16. It was the late 90s, and we were bored out of our minds. So when the oldest said she was taking a walk, we all begged to come along. I knew she was only taking a walk so she could sneak out to smoke, but I didn't care. I just wanted out of the house. We'd usually walk for about a mile, go to McDonald's or a drugstore for snacks, then turn around and come home. It was evening, and we were on our way back, and I was getting bored as the novelty of leaving the house had worn off. The 2 middle girls were walking ahead, talking about boy bands, and the oldest was hanging behind, trying to hide the fact that she was smoking. Suddenly I noticed a man with a dog about half a block behind us. I was so excited and hoped he'd get close enough so I could pet the dog. And sure enough, he started getting closer. I didn't think the oldest was paying attention, and the middle girls were way ahead, so I figured I could stay behind a bit and play with the dog. I started to walk towards the dog then, when my cousin grabbed me and pulled me close, whispering, "Don't. He has a knife. Just keep walking." I glanced behind us, and sure enough, the man was holding a long knife. He didn't say anything. He just kept following and staring at us. I had no idea she was paying attention, let alone closely enough to notice the knife, but I'm glad she was. My cousin took my hand then and hurried me home, trying to put as much space as possible between us and the man. We finally got home and ran inside, and thankfully never found out what he was going to use the knife for, never seeing him again. We also never walked after dark again. All of us are mothers now, and the idea of our kids being in this situation is terrifying. We try not to be helicopter moms, but we always try to have at least one of us with the kids, and make sure the kids know the importance of being aware of their surroundings. There can be scary people even in areas that feel safe. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.